Welcome back to another episode of Offbeat Adventures. We're standing here once again on the grade of the former Canadian Northern Railway and later Canadian National Railways, Dorion, and then subsequently Kinghorn Subdivision. We are just to the west, or on the west side of what is known as Copper Thunderbird Road. We are located nearby to the community of McDermott, which is in the municipality of Greenstone, Ontario. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be working our way from the west side of this road, picking up where we left off from a previous hike, which we did last year, which we redid last year. This is a redo, so we are redoing this section. So we did this back 3 years ago, so in the spring of 2021, and so we're redoing it because there's some new information that we want to add to the story. So our journey is going to take us about 4 miles. It's a beautiful fall morning, as you can see by the colors. So it's the 12th of October today. So things get started right from the get-go here, because where we are here is we are right in the middle of the siding at the station in this area, which was known as Fairloch. Fairloch was not the original name for this station. It was originally called Sandpoint. Some maps show it as Grand Point. I don't know if that was an error, but it was originally known as Sandpoint. The name was changed when the line opened to Fairloch. Now there is a creek that runs just to the south here. We crossed it a little ways up there, which is called Fairloch Creek. I don't know if one was named after the other or if they were both named at the same time. Obviously a Scottish name, probably had something to do with the railway. The president of the railway, William Mackenzie, was Scottish, so that could be the connection to it. Fairloch was located at milepost 33.683.3. So again, there's a mileage issue there. We're going to talk about that. You can actually see our little first point of interest here is we actually have the milepost marker. So this is milepost 83. So this is 83 miles on the Kinghorn line. The original mileage, again, would have been slightly different. The original mileage would have been 33.3. Again, we're gonna talk about that. So you'll notice the milepost marker. Hopefully you can see that okay. You'll notice that there's a sign on the bottom too. It's a permanent slow order sign. I'm guessing basically to have the trains slow down as they entered the siding here. Interestingly enough, on the back side of the slow order sign, you can actually see the green. You can see obviously the obligatory bullet holes in here. You could see the green sign, which is obviously the all clear sign, so the trains could accelerate as they leave the siding here. So we'll talk a little bit more about we'll talk a little bit more about this about Fairloch Station when we get there. Now what's interesting is we're actually I mentioned there was a connection with the name. We're actually passing through First Nation territory here. So we will actually be passing by 2 First Nation communities. The first one, which is around here, and the one is a little bit further to the south beside McDermott. And so the First Nation community here basically was formed on land that used to belong to a provincial park. So it was originally called Black Sand, and then it became Lake Superior Provincial Park in 1978. In 1994, the land was closed, and it was transferred from the province to the government of Canada to create the First Nation community around here, which originally was known as Sandpoint First Nation. That's its English name. However, it goes by its traditional Ojibwe name, its traditional Indigenous name, which is Bingwi Neyaashi Anishinaabek. Hopefully I got that right. I want to say a very big thank you to my colleague Esther, who teaches Indigenous language. I guess more appropriately a Chimigwich, to her for giving me some Ojibwe lessons. Hopefully I did that justice. So again, you can see the siding right beside us here. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about the situation here when we get to where the section house is. Okay, so let's get going here. We're gonna save our usual history lesson to after we get to the actual location of the station. Again, so it's a beautiful day. It was supposed to be mostly cloudy today. We are going to be turning south, and that's going to cause us some issues because we're going to be basically shooting right into the sun. Hopefully we're going to get shielded a little bit by these ridges here, so you can see essentially we're going to be looping right around this mountain here. So this is called Lookout Mountain. Again, you can see the beautiful fall colors. I think we're at peak. We're at peak this weekend, and so again, you can see all these vibrant yellows. Again, the geography of this area, we're just kind of on the border of the mixed forest, and then basically getting into boreal forest. So you can see that we do have coniferous trees. The deciduous trees are basically birches and poplars. You can see some of them have lost their leaves, but there's really no variation in the color. It's kind of different shades of yellow, and that's all you're really going to get. There's no oranges or reds. You might see that with some of the little bushes and things like that. Again, just a beautiful, beautiful view. So again, the siding is right beside us here, and as I mentioned, I will tell you the story about what went on here with the history of Fairloch once we get to where the actual station, quote-unquote, location is. You can see it's very wet in here as well. So Fairloch was an original station on the line, again being originally supposed to be called Sandpoint, and then the name being switched to Fairloch before it opened. And again, we'll talk about the history of the line very shortly here once we get to the station site. What time is it? It's 10:29. I'm gassed already. Had a little bit of a hiccup, if you can call it that, right at the beginning of the hike, which I will talk about once we get there. This is kind of an abbreviated hike because we're not doing the full route. We biked the full route, but we're not recording the full route because we've actually redone the end part. So my challenge for today is that I don't want to delete the videos that we did, the end part. So the end two videos are part 5 and part 6. So we have to cram all of this initial stuff into 4 episodes, or 4 segments. So that should be interesting. So again, just skirting the siding here, and we'll be on to the actual station here momentarily. Maybe I'll, to save some time here, I'll zip you ahead. Oh, partridge. We've seen quite a few of them this morning. I think it's a good year for the grouse. It was a mild winter last winter and a mild spring, and so good batches of babies this year. Okay, so here we're coming up to the site of where that quote-unquote station was. This line had very few stations on it. Kind of a long story, but basically ties in with the history of the line. It never really developed the amount of passengers that they sort of expected. So they never really built a lot of stations. Now, there were, however, section houses all over the place. So let's talk a little bit about the history of this location. So again, was originally supposed to be called Sandpoint. Now, this was supposed to be kind of the jumping off spot to Lake Nipigon when the line first opened. But during World War I, the community of McDermott was developed, and this sort of lost its basically lost its its spot. And then obviously further to the south, Orient Bay, they built a lodge in 1916, and that sort of became the big sort of principal location for the access to Lake Nipigon. So there was a siding here. It was removed from use in 1969, and then it was reactivated in 1981 in preparation for the reballasting of the line. So if you've watched episodes before, you know I curse the ballast. It's very difficult to pedal through. It's not bad in here. There's some sections that we're going to have some issues with. And so when it was reactivated in 1981, it became a spur that was 1,550 feet long, and it was known officially as storage track KI-40, and it was stayed here until 1986. Now the station itself, right, so the actual location of Fairloch, was removed as a station in 1974. There was a big sort of rationalization. There was a bunch of stations removed, and then it was reactivated in 1986. And then it remained on the line until sometime between 1996 and 2005 when the line was abandoned, or the line was deactivated. I don't know. The last timetable I have is 1996, and then I have 2005, and so something happened in between. Now, as I said, there was a section house located here. Why do we know that? Well, because basically there was a section house at each location, at each station, and the telltale is we have this thing here. So we basically have the well, which you can see is completely bone dry. It has been very, very dry this fall. I don't know about around here, but I know where I live in Thunder Bay, which is to the west of here, we had the grand total of 6 millimeters of rain in the month of September, right? So it has been very, very dry. So somewhere in here was the section house. So maybe what we'll do is we'll show you some timetables here, and so basically you can kind of see sort of the history of this station. Okay, here we go. So we're leaving the station at Fairloch behind. The siding is still beside us here. We have Luna in the trailer. We're gonna bike her back a good chunk of the way just to save some wear and tear on her paws here. The ballast is a little bit tough on her. So I believe right up here is where the siding starts to peter out. You can see it sort of comes back together here. Gotta watch where I'm going here. Okay. So maybe we'll do our usual history lesson. So this line was constructed by Well, hold on a second here. So we have a culvert with a milepost marker on it, very clear one. So I don't know if you can make out the writing, but it says 83.47, which is the mileage on the original line, which is 33.7 on the original iterations of the line. Okay, so speaking of which, this line was constructed by Canadian Northern Railway between 1911 and 1914. It was going to be one of the final pieces in Canadian Northern's transcontinental ambitions. The Canadian Northern Company got its start in Manitoba way back in 1896. Bought up some old charters and some kind of struggling lines. Their first big project was the construction of a line between the then city of Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay, and Winnipeg. And so that line was built between 1899 and 1902. Excuse me. And then following that, they began building all kinds of lines throughout the prairies, particularly in the northern part of the prairies, which was at the time underserved. And Canadian Northern sort of became synonymous with the northern prairies. Now, at the same time, they began constructing lines and buying up charters north out of Toronto, eventually reaching up into the Sudbury area. Now, at this point, Canadian Northern realized that the long-term viability of the company was going to depend on them having a transcontinental connection. However, they didn't want to build a transcontinental line, particularly this section, and obviously the mountains of British Columbia. This section was going to be 550 miles between the end of Steele at Rouel, outside of Sudbury, and Port Arthur. It was going to be very difficult to build because of the geography, and therefore very expensive. So they didn't want to build it. So they looked at all kinds of options, running rights agreements with Canadian Pacific, none of which panned out. So they were forced to build. So again, construction starting in 1911 in this area. So they were working on the tunnel that we're going to visit. We've already visited, but you're going to see in the series of segments. That began in late 1911, and construction was completed in 1914. So New Year's Day 1914, the last spike was driven. Now, unfortunately, shortly thereafter, the line opened in 1915. So around that time, Canadian Northern started running into some financial difficulties, due primarily to two things: World War I, and there's a really bad section of ballast here, and the cost of construction. So, for example, building through the mountains of British Columbia, building this section of line. And so by 1917, the company was bankrupt and had to be taken over by the Canadian government. And then a year later, in late 1918, it was merged, amalgamated, whatever you want to describe it, with a bunch of other Canadian government-owned bankrupt lines called the Canadian Government Railways. And that merger formed Canadian National Railways. So in January 1919, this became a Canadian National line. And in 1922, the name of this line changed. It became originally had been the Nipigon subdivision of Canadian Northern. It became the Dorion subdivision of Canadian National Railways. And that continued as such until 1960, when there was a merger with the more easterly Kinghorn subdivision, which has a huge long story to it. Basically, this line kind of died in 1924 when something called the Nakina Cutoff was opened, and the main line was rerouted to the north. And so in 1960 it was merged with the Kinghorn, and so the entire line became the Kinghorn, all the way from Long Lac through to Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay. Originally, this line had started in Jellicoe. And so the line continued to operate until 2005, when it was discontinued. Service was discontinued by CN. And then the rails were ripped up between 2008 and 2010. Okay, we're going to pause here, and then we're going to keep going to the south.